let us talk about the main steps in doing literature review. And step number one is choosing the literature review topic. What do you want to review? And once you understand that, you now look at where do you get the material. Of course, you get the material from databases. And then the third point is analyzing and evaluating literature review sources. Are they legitimate? And then organize and synthesize the literature and build an argument. I'm going to deepen on that. Then developing a writer voice and following a writing convention. How do you want to do your literature review? If you're doing a standalone journal article, a literature review kind of, then you may want to generate or to develop a writer's voice, an argument. What is your argument? What is the central argument in your work? What are you arguing about? Why are you doing this literature review? What have you set out to do? And so, are you arguing from a feminist point of view? Remember, I talked about political standpoint. Are you arguing from are you arguing from a postmodern point of view, or are you arguing from what point of view? So then, of course, there'll be writing, there'll be editing and refining the literature review, and we shall deal with that in a short while. So this is basically a summary of a few of the steps that you can follow when you're writing your literature review. Let me get into details about this. Before I do that, so one of the questions that students ask me is, how will you know that you have done, you have done enough now on the literature review? There is something we call reaching a saturation point. And reaching a saturation point means that, there is nothing more that is coming from the literature that you're reviewing, nothing new. The more you get into the literature, you still end up getting material that you have already interacted with. So when you start getting that kind of redundancy, then you should know that you're reaching the saturation point. So where do you get the material from, or what are the sources? Basically, I know at this point, we all know different databases, including the databases where we get our material, International Bibliography of Social Science, Scholar, Google Scholar, or Social Science Citation Index, Medline, ELIC. All these, they are databases that we interact with them often. So if you're doing a professional or you're doing a scholarly literature review, it is important that you actually look for data from peer-reviewed journals to avoid getting a lot of literature from, for instance, plagiarized journal articles. And then, of course, we have other documents we call gray literature. And like meta synthesis accepts gray literature, and this is literature sometimes that has not been peer reviewed. Some of them include theses from databases. We have databases that that store theses. We have Open Gray, a multidisciplinary database, and you may get this and other sources of gray literature, or literature that probably is not within the category of peer-reviewed literature that we always talk about. Others include reports, and they may be important because you need a lot of information about a certain issue that is not very well explored by scholars who write journal articles. And therefore, at that point, you may want to go for these other types of literature, including reports, theses, and so on. Now, when you are doing your research or you're doing your search, it's important to know how to how to punctuate your search so that you do not get irrelevant material. And one way is to use the quotation marks. This is a kind of computer language that will tell the computer that you only need that material and not other that probably are similar. And also, like using the asterisk, the star that you can see there, it tells the search engine that they can bring information of related terms. For instance, if you're talking about therapy, you can have therapy and then star, and it will give you all the ones that are close to that or that comes from that stem. Then when you're doing literature review and you want to analyze your literature review, there are two terms that I always say that you need to understand very clearly. And the first term is analysis, and the second term is synthesis. And I wanted to spend just a few minutes to unpack these two terms because they are very critical, particularly at the level of PhD. When we say or we talk of analysis, we are saying you select, you differentiate, you dissect, and you break it up. So you unpackage a thing into its constituents part in order to infer or determine the relationship. You are analyzing, you are breaking it apart to see what is inside. So it's like opening up an engine to see what works, how does it work inside, what items work with which, which part work with which part so that the vehicle can move. So then to determine the relationship or organizing principle between them and thereby isolating the main variable. So once that is what we mean by analyzing, you select, then you differentiate, then you dissect, then you break up and isolate the main variables or understand the organizing principles in a certain phenomena. Now, synthesis is actually a bit different from that. When you're doing a synthesis, you actually rearrange, you integrate, you combine, you recast, you formulate, you reorganize things. So it is rearranging the elements derived from analysis. If, for instance, we use the analogy of an engine, vehicle engine, and an engine from a car. And what we are saying now, okay, you have put it apart in the analysis to understand the organizing principles, to understand the key variables in that issue. But now here, when you're doing the synthesis, you are trying to integrate. You take from this scholar, from that scholar, from that scholar, from that scholar, and integrate. So what are these five scholars talking about? So if you analyze like 30 peer-reviewed journals, you may want to synthesize by looking at the emerging themes within those journals, and you do this by rearranging the elements derived from the way you analyze the data and come up with, you can now say that these five scholars seem to be using this approach to understand this issue. These other five scholars are using this other approach. So you rearrange the elements derived from analysis to identify relationships. So or show main organizing principle, or show how these principles can be used to make a difference. So you can actually even recast, you reorganize these principles and then show, oh, okay, we can do it even differently if we looked at so and so's argument and so and so's argument and bring together these arguments, we can actually have a different way of looking at things altogether. So synthesis usually it becomes difficult to a number of students, but I think the main reason why it becomes difficult is because the students are not able to differentiate between analysis and synthesis. So in analysis, you break apart. you differentiate these things, you dissect, you go into an engine and dissect it, you bring it apart, and you try and look at what are the organizing principle within that engine. But in synthesis, you integrate, you pick some aspects of the engine from a certain vehicle and another vehicle and another vehicle, you try and integrate them, or different parts of the same vehicle, you try and integrate them, you try and combine them, you try and recast them, you try and refocus, reformulate, or reorganize, so that you can look at things even differently. I believe now it should be clear to everyone. Now, sometimes students ask me, okay, so I have 40 journal articles, right? So how will I even analyze 40 journal articles? Many of the graduate students will tell you, if they're honest, that sometimes it's not even easy to read two in a day. Some of the journal articles are so difficult, such that you read only one in a day. So how do you even evaluate? How do we synthesize? How do we analyze, as I was saying, 30, 40, 20 journal articles to come up with a peer-reviewed paper? Now, there are ways of doing this, and one of the best way that I found very, very interesting, and that has helped me to do my synthesis and even systematic reviews, is the use of matrices. Now, matrices are simply tables. So you can actually organize your work in a way in tables. On this side, you can see the authors' names. So these are the authors. And then in this table, the reviewers who are looking, were interested in the aims. What was the aim of the study? What was the participants' setting? And then the other one is, but there's also the methodology there, or the approach there, how was the data collected, and the final one was the key findings, the key findings. Now, when you have your data like that, during the analysis, then it is very easy for you to come back to this table and look at what is similar, what is not, which others got the same finding or got similar findings, and where were they doing their studies from? What was their aim? Did they aim to study? Did they use the same methodology? And did it give the same results or similar results? And so on. So with this kind of matrix, and others may look like this, where you can have the others on top there, and then you have as many variables going down. For instance, in this case, the scholars were interested also in the number sampled. So when people are making these conclusions, they're making these conclusions from how many people, what was the sample size? So that was important to them. And because it was about it is a medical research, they were looking also at the mode of birth, the setting, where was it, it's a qualitative method, what kind of study is it? Is it a content analysis? Is it a phenomenological study? Is it a thematic data? Is it a discourse data? What kind of a study was it? Then the other one is, how was data collected? Was it through interview? Was it through focus group discussions? And the other one is the notion of validity, positioning of the researcher, and so on. So you can decide on how to organize your information when you're doing analysis. But I have found the tables very, very important, and they work very well. So as you go through each of the journal articles, you have in mind what you're looking for. So in this case, the researcher was very interested in what was the sample. So they put in this, they have the sample in the matrix, very quickly. What was the mode of birth? What was the setting? What was the method, the qualitative method used? What was the data collection method, and so on? So when you have this kind of a table, you are actually going to be more focused, and it will be easier to do the literature review in a quicker and more productive or effective way. Then as I wind up my presentation so that I can give room for question and answers, then we ask ourselves, then how do we write the literature review? I'm just going to give very general guidelines or steps on how to go about writing the literature review. So we started with analyzing the topic. What exactly do you want to do? What exactly are you being asked to do? Number two, you locate the appropriate published research on the topic. Be very careful about using material you have located on the internet, because some of them may not be legitimate material. So I usually advise, particularly students at graduate level, to stick to the peer-reviewed journals from legitimate databases, and we know them. Right now, we have several lists, that are on internet about the plagiarized and possibly plagiarized journals, or and therefore we need to be very careful so that we do not use material that will not help us or will be rejected later. So number three, read and understand the research you have located. Is it relevant for your work? Then use the tables to summarize the research that the papers that you are reading. Then start analyzing. And when you're analyzing, as I said, you may want to ask yourself, as you fill in that table, what methods were used? What findings did these researchers get? What common strands are there, among these studies? What differences have you noticed? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of these research? You can have a column on that. How convincing is the research? What further research may be needed as you're reading that paper? What did you find out? Then decide on an organization for your analysis. For example, you can start from general to specific, where you want to discuss the general things. You start by going broad and then come to specific. Then some scholars use what we call chronological approach. And chronological approach here means that a scholar may look at an issue. For instance, you may look at an issue and how it has developed over time. So you may want to go to the oldest journal articles that have, or the oldest scholars that have discussed this issue. Then another group of scholars may want to look at issues. They may want to review their literature, using methodological approaches, or even the research designs that are used. So you may want to look at how have those scholars that have used qualitative approach, how did they look into this issue? And those scholars who used quantitative, how did they look at this issue? And what were the findings for each of the categories that I've talked about? There are so many other ways of looking at ways of organizing your work. And finally, you start now writing the draft and reviewing your work over and over. So the other critical thing, and I think this is the last thing that I want to discuss for now, is the headache of the references. How do you deal with the references? I would advise that students get familiar with references that with the softwares that can help you to manage references, including EndNote, Reference Manager, LeftWork, BibTeX, Zotero. All these, some of them are free, some of them are online referencing software, and they can help you to manage the references. Now, if you do not manage the references can take even 2 days to reorganize and to update, and that will be a big waste of time. So try and get to understand how you can use one of these, particularly those that are free for now, so that and as you go on, probably you can purchase one like EndNote is very effective, and it is used, you can use it together with softwares that help to analyze or review literature like NVivo. Personally, I use NVivo to do some of these things because I'm used to NVivo, and it works in almost the same way. So, but I've used a general way of looking at literature review because I did not want to assume that everybody has a software like NVivo. Thank you so much. I want to stop there for now.